If you haven't seen the Grand Panorama of the Whaling Voyage around the world, it is time to do so. Now, I know you have time. It's going to be up till October. But this is the nation's longest painting. It's on display at the Kilburn Mills, 127 West Rodney French Boulevard in the south end of New Bedford. The 1,275-foot painting, created in 1848. That means it's 170 years old. The New Bedford Whaling Museum took the lead in restoring this piece of art and came up with a wonderful plan to display it. The chief curator, Christina Canet, is with us to talk about all things Panorama. Christina, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
How did the Whaling Museum get a hold of this painting?
It was originally donated to the museum exactly 100 years ago this year by Benjamin Cummings, who was a local businessman. And he had found it in one of the buildings he had acquired and spoke with the Old Dartmouth Historical Society, decided that it was appropriate for that institution.
And so this is, as we said, a 170-year-old painting, but just receiving this piece of art must have been kind of incredible. And then deciding, okay, so what do we do with it now? Was that always the plan? We've got to restore it and display it?
It was not always the plan since its acquisition by the museum. There are very little records of what the plans might have been, actually, for the first few decades of our stewardship of the painting. Mm-hmm. It was actually considered quite an albatross. It's a huge artifact to try to house, and every museum has storage issues. So at some point, the anecdotal story is that somebody put it away in a basement to make sure that it was preserved and not getting rid of at some point. So, but it was really a curator named Philip Purrington, who's not related to the artist, who recognized how valuable an artifact this was historically for the city, and he started looking into conservation efforts for the panorama. It was shown in the 60s on Pope's Island, and then it actually went off to the World's Fair in New York. So it hasn't been shown in its entirety since the 1960s. Wow.
Okay, so here we are in 2018, actually in 2017 or so, the restoration work began. Were you here you were here at that time, weren't you?
I was here at the most recent time when we fully implemented the conservation project.
Okay.
But certainly the initial work had been started at least 20 years ago by several other conservators, including Robert Hauser, who was a former conservation and curator at the Whaling Museum. But really the work started in earnest about 2 years ago and was completed last year.
What goes into restoring something like this? I mean, I just can't imagine. It's 170 years old, and it was put in a basement to preserve it. Mm-hmm. That's not always the best place.
No. It has undergone several iterations of slight conservation over the past few decades. It was backed with plastic to be installed at the Whaling Museum in part in the 70s and 80s. But that's not the practice we would use now, so that had to be undone. So there was a lot of work, a lot of protocol research with various experts from all over the country, led by D. Jordan Burson, who's our collections manager, our director of collections. And so what he decided to do was to spray the paint of the panorama with a gelatin solution to stabilize it, because as we were trying to unroll it and inspect it, paint would powder off onto the floor. So this was a way to stabilize the paint surface so we could start work on it from a textile perspective. So we brought in a couple of wonderful textile conservators from Context. They built a special apparatus, and they sewed bits together that had been torn apart or were in some kind of state of irrepair.
The restoration, was it funded by the Whaling Museum? Did you have a grant? How did that all happen?
Well, it's largely funded by the National Park Service, actually, and many other private and family foundations. And the work was about $400,000 in total. So it was a major fundraising effort for the museum to undertake. So now that's one of the reasons why we will never show it again as a moving panorama, because this was meant to be early cinematography, and it would roll from spool to spool and travel to different cities around the country. But in doing that, on this very delicate cotton sheeting with distemper water-based paint, it did cause damage to the piece. So we won't display it like that again. So that's why we needed a space the size of the Kilburn Mill to display it statically in rows. And at the Whaling Museum, actually opening on the 29th, the weekend after next, That's where we'll show the digital experience. The whole thing was digitized as we were doing the conservation project by Michael Lapidis, who's our director of digital initiatives. And so the whole thing has been stitched together as a film. So you can sit exactly as you would have done in the 19th century when it was first being performed in the 1850s, 40s and 50s, and sit in front of the digital projection and get the idea of what it would have been like to be at one of these performances by Benjamin Russell and Calla Purrington.
There was really some precise work needed to restore this.
Very much, and everything was very carefully vetted. The protocols were very carefully designed so we could do our best to maintain our stewardship of the panorama in the most appropriate manner. Other panoramas have been included in painting. When you go to see ours, you'll see that there are sections that look a bit worn, but that's actually something we decided to keep. Instead of trying to repair that paint, we just stabilized it so you can really see the echoes of the life of this object, which is pretty special. So we decided to leave it as it is and just make sure that it's stable.
So who thought of the Kilburn Mills as a display area, Christina, and how did that come about? I mean, when I first heard it, I was kind of surprised that this was selected. And then as I saw it mounted and I put in place there, I said, this is a perfect place.
I have to say it was a lot of work to find the right place because while there are a lot of big empty buildings in New Bedford, we had to think about atmosphere and access and handicapped accessibility, proximity to the whaling museums. And the size had to be very carefully vetted and designed, the layout accordingly to each space that we were considering. There are a lot of places we had to take off the plate immediately because they were just too small. And as we worked out different floor plans, we had to be careful to make things where you don't get trapped. If you make it too serpentine, too circular, then people can't get to an exit quickly enough. So we had to think of all these different factors in locating a space. And the guys who run Kilburn Mill are just unbelievable. They restored this space to our specifications. They've just been amazing to work with. And it's just a beautiful place. It's right along that gorgeous new walkway the city put in. Right there, there's parking. It's straight shot from the Whaling Museum. It's only a mile and a half away. And it's climate controlled. It's just a spectacular location. We're really thrilled about it.
So you had a lot of help.
We had a lot of help.
Kilburn Mills helped you. The experts that were brought in to restore this wonderful display, this artwork, and what we have today. When folks go down and see it, I can guarantee you it's pretty breathtaking.
It's pretty extraordinary. I mean, I had artists do renderings. We had floor plans. We had made up mock images of all kinds to consider these spaces. But when we actually put up the first roll, we all stood back, sort of tearing up, like, this is so cool. I can't believe we finally got to do this. It's really overwhelming. The scale of it, the colors, the painting itself is just such an extraordinary object. And it's fascinating. Michael Dyer, who's our curator of maritime history, has gone through every single ship, every single tree, practically every building, and tried to identify as many of these points of call as we possibly could. And there's so many stories to tell within the artifact. It's really fun. It's a very cool thing.
And folks, you're living in a historic city, a really historic city, at one time one of the richest cities in the world. And this brings you back to that time. It is really a wonderful historic document of the whaling industry in New Bedford, and that's what this artwork is.
It is. And another thing, just to speak to the location, we are also the Old Dartmouth Historical Society, so we are the regional repository of local stories, and the panorama really is it sounds a little bit silly, but it really is the fabric of the city. I mean, you look at this panorama and you follow the journey, and you can see all of the points of call of all these different places around the world that make New Bedford such a cosmopolitan international city. The visit goes from New Bedford to the Azores to Cape Verde to Rio de Janeiro around to the South Pacific and up into the Fijian Islands and Hawaii. And there are all these wonderful connections with the narratives we already tell at the Whaling Museum that connect us directly to the community. And it's in a different part of the city, and it's open access, so it really opens boundaries in a whole different way than we've been able to do in the past.
You're listening to Townsquare Sunday. The chief curator at the Whaling Museum, Christina Canet, is my guest. What's most remarkable about the painting as you see it? I mean, we've both been talking about it with superlatives, but most remarkable. What catches your eye the most? those?
Well, one of the most fun things to me, because I'm an art historian, but I'm also was a professor of visual culture for quite a while, and I love the fact that it was meant as a form of public entertainment, but that Benjamin Russell took the care to make it as accurate as he possibly could, because his audience would have been very familiar, especially on the East Coast and in New Bedford, with the authenticity of the piece. So the fact that he actually went on this voyage, and he did take some artistic licenses, certainly, and added some elements like the Essex is in it. He wasn't around for the Essex. It was 20 years before he went to sea. But it's really an extraordinary artifact for public spectacle. And the crew of the Lagoda, which is our big whale ship model, would have gone on a very similar, if not identical, journey as that Panorama. But also when they got home, they would have seen it performed. So it's kind of this wonderful, their true experience, but also they would have enjoyed going to see this performance themselves.
The Panorama will be on display till October. I think Columbus Day it is. Mm-hmm. So local folks have plenty of time to see it. I noticed the painting also got a mention this week on the CBS Sunday morning website.
It did.
Now, in my house, we tape that show religiously every Sunday morning. We may not get a chance to watch it right at 9, but we watch it. And so I dashed to the tape when I saw this a couple of days ago. And I said, well, it must have been on Sunday. It wasn't. Mm-hmm. A little disappointed. Was that just a header on the website? What was that? Can you tell me why?
Why that was on Sunday?
Yeah.
Well, the Panorama was open last Saturday.
Right.
So it was in time with that. And then we've also had a lot of press from Boston and New York and all over the place. Tina Millad has been doing a fantastic job getting the word out. So we're really getting quite a lot of press for this.
Yeah. Listen, it was on Facebook, and I saw it, and so that and it served its purpose. Mm-hmm. I just wondered why I didn't see it on television. Hopefully, they'll come to town and do a spot on it.
Well, WGBH is actually having us on. Jared Bowen will be on tomorrow night.
Okay.
So we're being featured on that program tomorrow evening,
good.
I think at 8:30. So.
Do you expect a lot of folks from out of town? I think
we do. We do, absolutely. As soon as this came out on the AP last year, we started getting calls literally from all over the world of people who want to know when it's up and how it's up and when can they come see it. So we do have people who have already made plans to come visit us from all over the place. So it's just been great. And we're collecting all the zip codes and country codes from people as they come, so we'll be able to track that very well over the summer.
All right. There's a second event regarding this, I think as you've already mentioned it. It's happening later in July. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little more about that.
Sure. So the exhibition at the Mill is called The Original, and the one at the museum is called The Experience. So you can go to the Mill and see the panorama as we can show it now, but you can see it in its entirety, but you need to wear your sneakers and walk the whole quarter mile. And we do have wheelchairs down there, and it's handicapped accessible, so it's available to everyone. But the museum piece is more about the public spectacle of the panorama, so how it was intended to have been seen, who would have seen it, and what's the context of its performances. So it was really the era of cycloramas. Moving panoramas were fantastically popular at the time all over Europe and America. All kinds of wonderful panoramas traveling around, including to this area in Boston. But also we have a fur seal who was owned by P.T. Barnum, which we have up in a whaling exhibit typically, but he was actually a circus animal, and we have the original broadside for him. We have all kinds of wonderful toys and magic lantern slides and different things that were also parts of public entertainment. Mm-hmm. So we've drawn all these sort of curiosities from the collection, and those will be featured along with a digital projection of the panorama in its entirety, and that's going to be life-sized with a full stage theatrical setting. So it'll be quite exciting. It's right off the bow of the Lagoda, so it's in the Bourne building and one of our beautiful historic buildings. So that's a different way to experience the panorama. And we also have great interactive kiosks that you can go in and learn a lot more information about it and check in different areas. So those will be at both sites as well.
All right. So this is only going to be one time?
No, this is open.
The
digital version will be open for several years. It's probably about 2 to 3 year show, and that'll be performed all day long. So there'll be a narrative that'll be playing, and then there'll be different programs that will wrap around it. And docents are already having wonderful ideas about doing theatrical performances, and we have music. The New Bedford Symphony is coming to the Mill in October. Lots of different artists are engaged in this project, too. So it's going to be quite dynamic programming we have. So please look at the website for all those details.
And again, this the digitized version, the premiere of that is
the 29th.
29th.
Yep. If you're coming to the gala, that's the 28th. But the opening to the public will be the 29th.
Very good. Okay.
And that'll be open every day, museum hours.
We should mention that there are some other art and history exhibits available to enjoy at the Whaling Museum, including The Amazing Women of New Bedford.
Yes, that's a new project that just came out, and it's a website launch and a trail walk that is called Lighting the Way. So if you go on our website, you can see exactly where the trail leads and all the different information. That just launched a couple of days ago. It's a fantastic project that was led by Sarah Rose, our Director of Education.
And recently a premiere, Milt Brightman's artwork.
Oh, I love that stuff. That's a beautiful show, curated by Mike Dyer. And Milton, we actually just informed Milton yesterday the museum will be purchasing one of his paintings. And we just love his work. It's an absolutely stunning exhibition. That'll be up through the Moby Dick Marathon in January.
Great. Christina Canet, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you very much for having me.
She is the chief curator at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. I'm told the person who knows all there is to know about the panorama. Congratulations to the Whaling Museum, really, for carrying out this challenging project and making it go.
Thank you very much. And please come join us down there at the mill.
Sure, I will be happy to, and I'll bring people along as well.
Great.
Townsquare Sunday returns in 60 seconds.